Hello, I'm Matt and welcome to Badger Workshop. I worked in pubs for years and my last workshop was actually based in one. So I always had the bar collect corks for me. Honestly, I didn't drink this many bottles of wine myself. I want to cut them in half, so I'm just going to rip down a couple of pieces of wood slightly taller than the side of the cork. You could just run the corks through the bandsaw, but I think it's going to be slightly safer to make a little guide for them. With a couple of bits cut, I'm going to CA glue the first piece onto the edge of another scrap of wood. I can then get a couple of corks pushed up against this first piece to work out where the next piece needs to go. I can then get that glued in place, leaving about a 1mm gap again. I give it a couple of minutes for the glue to set up, then I run it through the bandsaw just to trim the excess off. Now that I've made, let's call it a cork shoot, I'm just going to mark out the centre point on it. I line the centre point up with the blade and bring the fence up against the jig. When I've got it in place, I can start the bandsaw up and run the jig into the blade. Now just to keep it in place, I'm going to put a quick clamp around the jig and the fence. Now we can have a go at cutting some corks. So I'm just going to feed them in the hole and then I've got a scrap of wood to push them through. This keeps my fingers far away from the blade at all times. Works pretty well and cuts them dead down the centre, so I can just keep feeding them in and pushing them through, and I found I can actually load 3 in at a time and push them through. I always like using the bandsaw, but this was somehow very satisfying. So I need something to mount these corks to, and I've got this bit of 6mm ply. I want some nice lines to work off, so I'm going to mark in 1cm from both faces. Then I'm just going to draw a line along there and get the square positioned on that line. I can get a couple of clamps on just to hold the square in place, and then I've got a nice reference surface to put the corks against. I'm going to attach the corks with just some normal PVA wood glue. Impact adhesive would probably be better, but this is what I had on hand. My plan was to dip the corks in the glue and stick them down, but after even doing the first one I realised this was a stupid idea and far too messy. So I quickly moved to plan B, and that was to get a brush and spread out a bit of glue for each row. So now it's just a question of working through my corks and getting them all stuck down. I found one end of the cork would be more swollen than the other, so I alternated the direction so they fitted nicely. When I got them all stuck down, I found a bit of MDF about the right size, got it put on top, and then I could put my faithful bit of railway line on to hold it all down. I left it all for a few hours to dry, and then I could take it to the table saw and trim it down, leaving a 1cm border on the other two sides to match the first two. I wanted to make a frame for it and went through my wood pile and found a few bits of moulding left over from when doing the trim on the shepherd hut windows. It needed a rebate cut in it to accept that bit of ply, so I swapped out to my grooving blade and then I drilled a couple of holes in a scrap bit of wood. Then my newly modified Irwin clamps can just get tapped into place. This can then get put on the saw against the fence to act as a sacrificial fence. With it tightened down, I can then get it pushed up all the way against the blade. I can now run the moulding through the saw, cutting a rebate in the bottom. Two faces of the cork were nice where they'd been pushed up against the square. The other two needed a little bit of trimming up with a chisel. When I had it all nice and square, I could mark out the mouldings and start getting them cut to make a frame. When I had all the bits of moulding cut, I could then get it all glued together. I'm using my Veritas clamp to hold it all together while the glue dries. This is super handy for making frames because it keeps everything square and pulls the corners nice and tight. I allowed the glue to dry and then I wanted to get some stain on it. I'm just going to use some India ink as I wanted to really darken it up so it contrasts with the corks. The ink works really well and only one coat is needed. I got it on, left it a few hours to dry and then went back and got on some Danish oil to seal it all. Now I can get a bead of glue run around that 1 centimetre border I left all around the corks. With the glue all spread out, I can then get the frame lifted into place. An air stapler is on my wish list, but on such thin ply, just the handheld one works fine. And that's it all done. It almost looks too cool to cover in notes. Thanks for watching, thanks to my patrons, and please subscribe for more videos.